Pinang. I also like to thank everyone for being here this evening. I'm delighted to see a lot of people who are willing to take their time off from their busy schedule to participate in this conference. In fact, it is interesting to note that the room is still full. This is a testimony of the importance of this topic for the political development and nation building of the country and the region. Or it can also be attributed to the interesting points, intriguing facts, and arguments brought up by our renowned speakers who specialize in their own respective fields. And for tonight, we are very fortunate to have the Honorable Mr. Abhisit, a prominent figure himself in fighting corruption and propagating clean government. And on behalf of Penang State Government and the Penang Institute, I would like to say thank you very much to Honorable Mr. Abhisit for taking time off from his busy schedule to be with us tonight. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, we share a common attribute on this, Mr. Abhisit. Oppositions like us have to be politically active and stay active all the time, otherwise we cannot take over the government. Ladies and gentlemen, now we have reached the apex of our conference, a keynote address by the Honorable Mr. Abhisit. We have started earlier today by recognizing the importance of having a clean election as the main prerequisite for good governance and democratization. We also have been exposed by the various real case studies and real experiences of our neighboring countries in moving towards good governance and democratization, and also academic analysis of these countries. For the discussion, it is important to note that all our neighboring countries have experienced regime change and clearly moved to democratization, except us, Malaysia. The present government has held on to power for more than 50 years, resisting change in a number of significant ways. And it is no wonder that it is so difficult to bring clean election in this country. And this also means it will be terribly difficult to establish clean governments in this country without regime change. And on the other hand, the Patang Rakyat government or state governments have shown clearly that the clean states can do and bring about significant beneficiaries to their respective people. And now, I want to repeat briefly what the Right Honourable Chief Minister has said about Penang's success by practicing clean government through CAT, competency, accountability and transparency. Penang was the only state in Malaysia commended by Transparency International for its open tenders and good governance based on competency, accountability and transparency, and been praised for the efforts in making the state free from corruption. And the Auditor General, through the annual report, lauded Penang as the best financially managed state in the country. Penang recorded the highest budget surpluses in history, with RM 88 million in 2008, RM 77 million in 2009, and RM 33 million in 2010. The budget surplus, ladies and gentlemen, would have been RM 92 million in 2009 if not for the state government paying RM 15 million to the High Court due to the Tang Hak Ju land scandal caused by the previous PN government. And when we took over Penang in 2008, Penang's debt amounted to RM 630 million. By 2011, Penang State's debt has been significantly reduced to only RM 30 million. And Penang's sterling financial performance is not limited to the state government's administration, but also turning around and saving the local councils, particularly Majlis Perbandaran Seberang Perai, from bankruptcy. We have 2 local councils in Penang. And from 2009 to 2007, NPSP suffered record deficits every year, losing and spending Rm 230 million by the previous government. And NPSP was particularly bankrupt when we took over. However, in only 1 year, the state CAT's government managed to rescue NPSP from financial bankruptcy by recording a small surplus in 2008 and surplus again for all 3 consecutive years as follows. 2008 Rm 3 million, 2009 Rm 15 million, and 2010 Rm 23 million. And as a result of this policy, we are able to share our success with our people by giving back to the people, by implementing people-friendly programs in recognition of the support and services to the state. Briefly stated, these policies included Senior Citizenship Appreciation Program, Golden Baby Programs, financial assistance to students, and as a program which the Right Honourable Chief Minister will touch in his closing remarks afterwards. Now again, on the importance of clean government and its benefit to the people and democracy, let me introduce to you His Excellency, the Honourable Mr. Abhisit, who himself, as I mentioned earlier, is a prominent figure in fighting corruption and propagating clean government. Mr. Abhisit, a former Prime Minister of Thailand, began his political career in 1992 as a Democrat MP for Bangkok constituency. And in the elections of 2001 and 2005, he won his seat at the House of Representatives. And 2005, Mr. Abhisit was picked as Democratic leader to replace Bantatan, who resigned following a flat defeat by Thaksin Shinawatra, Thai Rak Thai Party in general elections that year. In December 2008, the Honourable Mr. Abhisit was elected as Thailand's 27th Prime Minister through a special parliamentary vote following the departure of Somchai Wangsawat. The Honourable Mr. Abhisit graduated with a bachelor's degree in philosophy, politics and economics, and later obtained a master's degree in economics from Oxford University, UK. And the Honourable Mr. Abhisit is a strong proponent of clean governance who believes in the promotion of honesty and uprightness among the public, especially government officials. Ladies and gentlemen, I sincerely hope that this seminar, this conference will result in closer cooperation among us, ASEAN countries, in our effort to fight corruption and bring about good governance and meaningful democracy. And again, ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Honourable Mr. Abhisit Vejjajiva to deliver his keynote address.
Honourable Chief Minister, Mr. Chairman, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, allow me to congratulate the Penang Institute for successfully holding this inaugural conference on an issue which I think will determine the future of our countries and of our children in the region. A coalition for clean governance in ASEAN is a very relevant movement that will enable us to reach our full potential as we establish the ASEAN community. Let me reiterate the fact that in 3 years' time, all 10 Southeast Asian nations will form a single community. Economic community, socio-cultural community, and also political security community. It is an ambitious integration program which will result in having a single production base and a single market for all 10 Southeast Asian economies. And the potential for growth and opportunities is enormous. People recognize that the Asia-Pacific region and the Southeast Asian region is one of the fastest growing regions in the world. Economically, we are expected here in this region to provide a dynamic and powerful force that would generate global economic growth. But as as we see from other regional integration, notably now the problems that we have in Europe, we know that integration is not easy. All individual members of any grouping will have to go through a period of adjustment. And it's not just about economic adjustments or economic policy making, but the political dimension, the importance of institutions in individual nations that make up this community will do much to determine the success or failure of integration. So despite the high growth that we are experiencing, the expectations that we will be successful, none of this can be taken for granted. Rather, we need to make sure that we have an environment, a culture, if you like, that will support us through our integration program so that we can fully realize this great potential of peace and prosperity in the region. Recently, economists have tried to answer the question why some nations or some regions are successful and why others fail. And despite much debate, there now appears to be a convergence of views that what really determines the economic success and growth of an economy or a country or a region boils down to the set of institutions that exist and the process of governance. In particular, throughout economic history, any country, any society that has institutions which are inclusive, that encourage free and fair competition, that uphold the rule of law, that encourages participation, these economies will be successful and will continue to grow in a sustained manner. On the other hand, institutions that tend to concentrate powers in the hands of the few, institutions that rather than generate growth actually try to extract the benefits of growth into the hands of those in power, will find sooner or later that growth can no longer be sustained. This is a very important insight and a fact that I think is very important as we build our institutions, build our nation, and build our communities. That is why the issue of governance and democracy cannot be separated from the issue of achieving economic growth and prosperity. They must go hand in hand. And it would be very rare for any country that wants to liberalize, that wants to reform its economic systems while maintaining political institutions that simply cannot keep up or match those kinds of changes and reforms. And vice versa, it would be also very rare for any country to successfully pursue political reforms without achieving the kind of economic reforms that will generate growth and prosperity to support that process too. Which is why I think much of the discussion at this very conference concentrates on the need to have a strong democracy that will support good governance, clean governance, so that we can realize our common aims of peace and prosperity. And while democracies and good governance are not synonymous, each can feed on each other and each can support each other. For me, coming from Thailand, we have had a long experience of struggling with the process of both democratization and the fight against corruption to achieve clean governance. We are at the moment trying to write yet another constitution. I've almost lost count. And I've certainly lost count of the number of coups d'etat that we've had in the country. But one common factor, every time that there is a coup in Thailand, the coup makers always cite a reason for taking their actions, and that is there is too much corruption. That's why throughout my political career, I am very determined to make sure that the parliamentary system becomes successful in Thailand has the kind of immunity against these kinds of extra constitutional changes. And to achieve that, we really have to work on the issue of achieving clean governance. Over the last decade, Thailand has taken a number of innovative steps to try to fight this problem. We have set up an independent counter-corruption commission, which used to be an agency at the Prime Minister's office, now an independent institution, an independent organization which has specific powers granted to it by the Constitution. And we have a number of mechanisms that have been enforced. Asset declaration, conflict of interest law, freedom of information law, and of course, continued improvements on regulations concerning procurement. I know that the state of Penang has also taken these significant steps with good results to support these measures that have been taken, and I'm pleased to see that there is clear progress if we try to implement these measures. Nevertheless, despite all the new mechanisms that we put in place, new legislations that we put out, we continue to face a number of challenges. And I'd like to offer you some thoughts which I think are particularly relevant as we move forward in our fight against corruption. First of all, we have to recognize that corruption itself goes through a kind of evolution. Corruption today is quite different from forms of corruption that we witnessed maybe a decade or 2 decades ago. Still, for many, when they think of corruption, they think of the kind of petty corruption, bribery at the lower levels of government. They think perhaps about basically outright theft, stealing from people's taxes or budget. But in fact, corruption has become much, much more sophisticated than that. We have collusion in bidding. We have policies that are in fact designed so that the people who implement those policies benefit more than the people those policies are meant to serve. And of course, every time we legislate, we have a new law in place, we have a new tool to fight against corruption in place, the people who are engaged in corruption move a step further. They find the loopholes, they look for new ways of engaging in corrupt practices. So there is no way that we can rest on our laurels when we have any kind of success. We have to continue to be acutely aware that this threat is always going to be there, and we always have to adapt and find additional measures to fight the evolving forms of corruption. Secondly, to be successful in the fight against corruption, you really have to make sure that there are fullest disclosures or as much disclosures as possible. People who engage in corrupt practices, they are afraid of light, of transparency, of people knowing what is going on. Which is why we need to have a number of measures put in place to make sure that the public, the people, know what is going on as far as the business of government is concerned. For instance, during the floods that we had in Thailand a couple of years ago, not the major floods we had last year, my government had to spend a huge amount of money in terms of rehabilitation programs, compensation, and so on. And we made sure that this was transparent. What we did was made sure that any agency that puts in requests for budget, citing the floods as reasons for this and that project, they have to submit full information. Photographs of the damages that they claim had taken place, an assessment of the cost, and all this we made available not just to members of parliament, but also put up on government websites with reference prices, and of course all the information concerning the bidding process for these projects, and allowing people to actually lodge complaints through these websites so that we can continue to monitor the way money is spent. It's this kind of standard where government fully discloses what it's doing. It's not only a way of preventing corruption, but also it's a way of engaging the public and general people to help you fight corruption. You need to have a free press, because they will be important watchdogs that must have teeth, and therefore can expose any kind of irregularities that take place. We need also to always be on the lookout to make sure that the public continues to be interested, continues to be aware, and has the possibilities of participating in the fight against corruption. One of the significant steps that my government also took was to invite the private sector to engage in this anti-corruption campaign. We said that when corruption takes place, usually three parties are involved: politicians, bureaucrats, and also the private sector. Every time we say somebody has taken a bribe, that means somebody has paid the bribe. And for too long, the private sector felt that the matter of fighting corruption was the business of government. It's not. It too has to join this fight against corruption, create the right attitudes, create the energy among the businessmen that they too will not tolerate corruption and will also help the government to fight corruption. Only if we can raise the awareness of people, give them full information, invite them to participation, can we hope to be successful in our objectives. Thirdly, we have to recognize that enforcing anti-corruption measures inevitably involves fighting against those with power. And in any society, in any country where enforcement is weak, the people who engage in corrupt practices will always get away. Which is why we need special laws, we need special institutions that are strong enough to stand up to those in power. Often it's very tough, often it's going to be politically difficult for people who want to join against the fight against corruption. And that is why we have to make sure that measures such as the protection of witnesses, whistleblowers, are also in place. That's the only way to make the powerful be held accountable. Moreover, we need also to recognize, as I said before, the evolving forms of corruption and look at the preventive measures. Particularly, I am now proposing, and the Counter-Corruption Commission of Thailand is now very much interested in making assessments and evaluations about policy designs and their impact on corruption. For instance, you may want to help farmers get good prices for their crops, but there are many ways of achieving that. Some of those will be market-friendly, transparent. Some of them will not be so transparent or market-friendly. That could lead to distortions, lead to loopholes, and therefore lead to corruption. Just as these days we evaluate policies and projects and see whether they are environmentally friendly, I think we should also assess all policies in terms of how friendly they are to anti-corruption measures as well. And finally, the bigger picture of the incentives of those who engage in corruption have, particularly involving the problem of money politics. Even in democracies, with intense competition in politics, the need to raise resources and to spend money to win elections, to engage in all kinds of marketing activities. These days, politics has become a very expensive business. And if raising that money is hard, if raising that money involves taking money from only certain individuals, certain groups, those people will be looking for a payback and for the rewards. And that's why in any fight against corruption, we also need to tackle the problem of money politics and how to design the political system or the democratic system to make sure that it doesn't succumb to the power of money. These are the kinds of issues, these are the kinds of thoughts that I'd like to offer, and hope that this coalition for clean governance will take up these issues in their respective countries and communities and find ways and then share experience and best practices so that we can improve upon the way we are handling the issue. But I should end by saying that despite all the know-hows that we may have, despite the good intentions, despite the political will, in the end, the fight against corruption can only be successful if the public or if the people want it to be. And that means we need to make sure that we instill the values of zero tolerance for corruption. In many societies, in many countries, in many democracies, often people just take the blind eye. They don't want to know about it, they don't think it's their business, and they feel that as long as things are going all right, or perhaps the economy continues to grow, their incomes continue to increase, that these issues don't matter. I don't believe that this can be sustained. And in the medium and the longer term, those economies, those democracies will suffer. And that's why we need to instill the right values among young people, among the public, to make sure that they have no tolerance for corrupt practices and that they feel that it is their duty to be part of this fight against corruption. We are fighting a problem that is as old as mankind, as old as greed, that has existed from the beginning of time. So it's going to be a long, difficult fight, and a fight that we will have to make sure that we win in the end. And I'm so pleased that here at this conference we have so many representatives from the ASEAN countries, because we are building a single community. What we need to recognize is that it's not enough to put our houses or our countries in order. In the end, our community will only be as strong as our weakest link. And therefore we have to be aware that this will become a regional challenge as people, money, labor, capital, investment and trade flow more freely across our borders. So I hope that you will all be encouraged and fired up to continue on this good fight against corruption, and that we will be able and be successful to achieve our aims, so that when we fully integrate into a single community, we truly realize the potential that this great region has. Good luck to all of you in this fight, and as far as us, Democrat Party in Thailand is concerned, we will stand with you side by side in this fight right to the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, His Excellency, Honorable Mr. Abhisit. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving another round of big hand to Mr. Abhisit.
The ASEAN Coalition for Clean Governance, I know it's still inaugural, it's still new, but I cannot help seeing the regional emphasis that this coalition is aiming for. My question is, what would be the common values that would be the unifying factor for all of those interested in the idea of clean governments to rally around? Right? So if we look at EU as one model of regionalism, we can see right now that it is pretty much tearing apart at the seams. Right? Project of a common currency is being questioned every day. The interests of nation states trump over any notion of regionalism or shared Judeo-Christian heritage, so on and so forth. So what is that common value, especially in this post-Cold War world, especially keeping in mind ASEAN's Cold War roots? So I'd like some clarification on that. Thank you.
the latest new member of ASEAN, say Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam. I think they have a gap, a different gap with the old ASEAN member countries. So how can bring the issue of the corruption or clean government as a regional agenda? Because I just recall what we had when you were as a prime minister. Even when we invite CSU becoming dialogue with the leaders at that time, it's very difficult to convince the new member countries. So how to convince the CRFP countries that the corruption of the clean government agenda is important for the regional grouping? Thank you.
Has to become populist. Okay, there are a lot of political parties racing towards itself to be populist party, or populism is thriving in this part of the world. As a prime minister, and you are going against a very popular populist party, okay, in your country, what is your dilemma? How do you reconcile? Because there are obviously it's some sort of like a political bribery, okay? When you have elections and things are going in this region. So what's your political dilemma? And also, can you tell us a little bit of your what do you call how do you fight political corruption? Some of your successes. Okay, thank you very much.
Two questions which have a regional dimension very much to them. First of all, the gap. I think ASEAN fully recognizes that the explicitly stated objective of integration must include the reduction of this development gap, that there must be greater equity within the region as well. So we're not just talking about free trade and investment and growth, but also more equity within the region. How is that going to be achieved? I think the number one item on the agenda now would have to be connectivity. Somehow the CLMV countries and Thailand, Malaysia, and then up north towards China, we need the connectivity to take place. Physical connectivity, that means infrastructure investment, highway networks, energy grid, rail links, telecommunications perhaps, and so on. Connectivity as far as what I call software is concerned, in the sense of harmonization of regulations and so on, and also people-to-people connectivity. Now, we should turn this into an opportunity. What's going to happen is these investments in infrastructure will require enormous financial resources. They're going to have to come from, say, development banks, come from investors from inside and outside the region. But such huge investments must make demands about the standards of procurement, of contracts, and the way these projects are implemented. That way, I think we integrate these countries into the kind of standards that we hope that they would achieve as they join the community. Likewise, the software connectivity will mean that all the regulations in whichever country that is lagging behind will have to be steadily brought up to the same kind of standard that will allow for real connectivity and therefore exchange and therefore trade and investment among the countries in ASEAN. The people-to-people connectivity, I think, will answer the first question about how we attain some kind of common value, some kind of unifying factor. We have to recognize this. I think we have to begin with common objectives. And you know, for so long, ASEAN was criticized by other regions for lacking the kind of ambitions that they had for integration program and regionalism. When I was the chair of ASEAN, European journalists used to ask me, why we were lacking in ambition and not aiming for a common currency. I think now they have the answers. And ASEAN's approach has always been a pragmatic and a gradual one, with clearly stated objectives. You know, the first 30, 40 years, it wasn't about the economics. It was about achieving peace, making sure that we can coexist peacefully within the region. Now we are shifting the focus to economic integration. But we recognize the limitations, one of which is the existence of this gap. And therefore, we continue to take a gradual approach, make sure that all nations recognize where we are going, feel that they belong to this common program, then we will be able to generate the kind of unifying factor or common values that you asked about. But what's the most difficult challenge for me is that even this is not enough. At the moment, we're just letting leaders, governments, in their twice-a-year summit, decide upon agreements, decide upon future programs. But if we truly want to create a community, if we truly want to create common values, we have to make our peoples feel that they belong to this community, that they are an ASEAN citizen, that they are part of this community. We are still a long, long way from that. Not just even a sense of belonging, but even awareness of the existence of ASEAN as a regional grouping is something that I'm sure in many countries, and Thailand included, we feel that we still do not have enough of. And that's something that we need to work on. Because in the end, when we talk about issues like clean governance, often the obstacles to achieving that are the people who are in power. They're the ones that will be making the agreements and determining the direction of the region. But the only way we will make sure that they subject themselves to the wishes of the people, we have to make sure that the people have a voice, have a way of channeling their views, but most important, they too have to feel that they belong to this community and that they have a sense of duty that they have to participate in this community building process. I recognize very well, Thailand began the idea of having leaders at the summit actually meet the civil society organizations in 10 countries. We ran into trouble with some of our friends in the region because their governments were not prepared to have that kind of forum. But in subsequent years, we are still trying to make sure that this gets on the agenda. We involve youth, we involve parliamentarians, and we should involve civil society in the building of this community. That's the only way to make sure that we can attain our objectives of having good common values that will support successful integration. Fighting populism. Well, if I knew the answer, I would be the opposition leader. We tried. We recognize that once populist policies get implemented, people to a certain extent become spoiled. They expect that to continue. And what we tried to do during my administration was to slowly adapt some of these programs. For instance, we began with handouts for the elderly, but we then, towards the end of the administration, were moving towards the setting up of a pension fund where people will also have to make contributions. A national savings fund, getting the informal sector to join social security, and slowly building up the idea that there is no free lunch. They have to contribute, that the government would match the kind of savings and contributions into programs that will guarantee security for them in old age or in sickness and so on. As I said, obviously it was not enough. But we have to be determined and keep a clear head on this. I think the person who asked the question clearly is afraid that there will be just a race to the bottom, that everybody will just try to outbid each other in populist policies, and in the end the policies cannot be sustained, the economy will sooner or later collapse, and that could also put democracy at risk as well. So I think politicians, political parties have to be courageous enough to tell the truth to the public about the dangers of populism, why they cannot be sustained. But if not, they will have to learn the hard way. And that is something that we all wish to avoid. But in the end, the people will have their say. And if they feel that they want to continue to experiment with this, they will have to accept the consequences. So it's up to individual political parties and politicians which path they will take. For us, Democrat Party in Thailand, I talk to the members of my party all the time about this, and we say we have to stick to what we feel is the right path. It will put us at a disadvantage when election time comes around, but we have to accept the consequences.
America. And one issue I realized over the years is how so many people, the talent of Southeast Asia is immigrating to Canada and the United States. Is it possible you can reverse this trend and get the talent to return back if there's some stability and transparency in your governmental system? That's all.
Your Excellency, you were the Prime Minister for more than 3 years in Thailand. And what were the steps that you have taken to combat corruption in your very own country?
Your Excellency, I'm Howard from the regionalised area, being a common, currency and all that palaver. Yes, it's falling apart at the seams, and no one really likes the sight of what's unfolding in front of us right now. And we also hear the words community being banded around here, and I think there's something that we need to encourage. The ASEAN community, and we're here essentially for the ASEAN Coalition for Clean Governance, and the word clean governance has been used quite a lot as well. And essentially my question is, in the corporate sector, in the private sector, and more often now in governments or governing agencies, vision, missions and beliefs are being used as the cornerstones of those organizations and institutions. What are your opinions on what the vision, mission and beliefs of the ASEAN community will be in the 10-year vision that you mentioned earlier on? What the vision, mission, beliefs of the ASEAN community will be when it becomes reality?
Vengeance over the currency. Just one point I would like leaders meet and they sign and they agree. There's somebody to remind them, you have to be accountable.
Okay, I'll take the two questions that are connected with the European integration first. Let me first of all say this. I know that we think that Europe is still in crisis and very much troubled by the currency issue. But it does illustrate, what's going on now does illustrate one point. When I said earlier that the success of ASEAN would depend on us making our people feel they belong to some kind of community, I think you should also look at the European problem from a different angle. We should actually be surprised that there is determination to keep things together in Europe. Whether you're a German taxpayer, you're a French bank, you're a Greek citizen, and so on. And I think that is actually a testimony to the success of the community building process in the past in Europe, where people felt that they belong, not just because they have the institutions that you mentioned, but they're determined to keep it together. Just imagine that if we had some kind of crisis, similar crisis hitting ASEAN, and we have to question or ask our own people whether they want to keep ASEAN together or somehow get out and find an easy solution. I think it would be very difficult to see the kind of determination to keep ASEAN together the way we have seen happening in the European situation. Even the Greek voters in the second round of voting have to think twice about even trying to change the austerity plans, that they somehow have to make compromises in order to keep things together. Now, why has there been difficulties in Europe, and also perhaps not as much progress from the ASEAN side in terms of institution building at the regional level? And my analysis has always been this. What we did in ASEAN was to try to, first of all, get all 10 Southeast Asian nations into ASEAN first. Which is why it was very difficult to deepen any kind of regional agreements. We couldn't be ambitious because there is this development gap, because we have so many different political and economic systems in the member nations. So we brought the 10 together, and then we begin to do the deepening of cooperation. We have a new charter, and who knows, we will slowly build towards the kind of institutions that Europe has, hopefully without the same level of bureaucracy and regulations. But what happened in Europe was the integration was very advanced. And then you brought in new members. And then you find that it's quite difficult to reconcile the differences or the gap that exists between the newer members with the existing members to try to reach the same, frankly, very high standards, which is why it's putting pressure on the kind of issue like currency when you have still fiscal sovereignty within each nation. So I think we're coming from different angles and therefore have different challenges at different stages of the integration program. So the gentleman at the back asked, well, what are we in ASEAN aiming for? Well, in the end, I think our common aim, when we work for our people, is that we hope that our people have the highest quality of lives. And to do that, there has to be balanced, sustained, inclusive economic growth. And to achieve that, as I said before, we need to build and have the kind of environment and institutions that would support that. Democratization, more rights for the people, and of course, instilling values and perhaps cultures that will also support these institutions. That's what ASEAN's aim should be, which is why I never wanted to put emphasis on a particular dimension of our cooperation, not even the economic integration. But I said that we need also to make sure that the political and the social changes that are necessary for cooperation and integration must also take place in parallel. So for instance, we talked about setting up the Human Rights Commission at the ASEAN level, at first in terms of promotion, but soon it will have to be about protection. And ASEAN's progress in recent years very much linked to what happens in countries like Myanmar. And therefore, there's a political dimension, rights dimension, environmental dimension, as well as an economic dimension. And we have to make sure that we actually take care of all these various aspects of integration. People who speak out against their own party? Did I get that right? I'm from the Democrat Party. If people that never speak out against their own party, they're not Democrats. So we're quite used to it, and we have our way of dealing with it. I think basically the best thing, of course, is to try to prevent it by having them speak out against you in your own internal meetings. So rather than let them vent their frustration or voice their disagreement publicly, you have to make sure that within the party structure, you have to be as inclusive as possible, be as democratic as possible, so that they have a way of channeling their disagreements and voices in some kind of internal process. And you make your explanation why the majority of the party might disagree with that particular member. Reversing the trend of losing our talents to a country like the United States. people often focus on financial incentives. My own take on this is somewhat different. I think I know a lot of very good, talented, intelligent people would love to work in their homelands, but find that the systems or the governance in their homelands just simply cannot cater for what they want to do for the country. They get frustrated, they get discouraged by corruption, by over-regulation, and so on. And I believe that as our countries in this region see this and put in good governance systems, maybe the financial rewards that are different would not be enough to actually lure these people away from their homelands. So I think, I know that the financial rewards problem has to be addressed too, but I think what's often ignored is that a lot of these people don't really want to go, but find that their talents are wasted in bad governance when they stay at home. And that's something that we need to address. Have I got all that? Oh, one more. What we did to combat corruption. I'll give you an example because I talked about policy design. In Thailand, we had a disastrous pledge scheme for agricultural products, rice, tapioca, maize, and so on, where the government basically, in the end, buys rice from farmers at sometimes even almost double the market price. Huge stockpiles, and then they find that the maintenance of the stocks, and also finally the way to get rid of the stocks, will be ridden with all kinds of corruption. We changed that policy. We continue to give to farmers, but we don't buy their products. What we do is we calculate the price that we want them to get, and then look at the market price and basically give them the cash difference as a kind of income support. That way, the government doesn't get involved in trade, doesn't distort the market, doesn't ruin the competitiveness of our exports. And the burden of that policy is transparent, because you have to actually put in the budget how many households you are helping, by how many bahts or dollars or ringgit and so on. This is what we did. That's the kind of thing that I think is not directly an anti-corruption policy as such, but having the issue of what I said earlier about some policies are more anti-corruption friendly than others. Unfortunately, of course, after the change of government, the current government has gone back to the pledge scheme. But only last week, the National Counter-Corruption Commission actually submitted the report to the government that it is making the observation that the pledge scheme basically leads to too much corruption, that there are alternative means of achieving the same objective, which is to help farmers get a good price or a good income without falling into this trap of allowing corruption to take place. That's the kind of thing we did. Basically invitation to the private sector to get themselves involved in the corruption fight. And I think we can also do that at the regional and at international levels as well. At the World Economic Forum, they have an alliance of private companies that sign up to some kind of agreement that they will never pay bribes in their own countries, in other countries, and if in order to get business in other countries they have to pay bribes, they would not go into that country. If you have this kind of alliance, if you create this kind of values among the private sector, then they will truly be joining you in the fight against corruption.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
For our honored guests, please remain on stage. I'd like to Will our honored guests please remain on stage for the culmination of our efforts here today? Thank you. Will His Excellency Mr. Abhisit Vejjajiva, Leader of the Democrat Party of Thailand, please sign this Penang Declaration. I would now like to invite Please give a big hand to all those who have made the commitment today. Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite the Chief Executive Officer of Penang Institute, the main organizer of this event, Mr. Zairul K. Johari,